The clinking of crystal glasses and soft piano melodies filled the air at Lumiere, the most exclusive fine dining restaurant in the heart of the city. Rich mahogany walls and gold-framed art whispered luxury, and the scent of truffle oil drifted through the room like an invisible veil of opulence. Waitstaff moved like dancers, polished and graceful, every gesture rehearsed, every smile part of the performance. To dine here was a privilege. To work here was pressure wrapped in elegance. That night, all eyes turned when the heavy oak doors swung open. A hush seemed to fall over the room, not a dramatic silence, but the kind that comes from a collective awareness. The kind of silence that attends power. Vincent Langford had arrived. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit tailored to precision, Vincent was not just a billionaire, he was a presence. Cameras followed him when he left airports. Articles were written about his watches. Rumors whispered that he'd once fired an executive mid-flight, in the air, and had the man's things waiting for him at the arrival gate. Ruthless didn't begin to describe him. Brilliant, maybe. Dangerous, certainly. And now he was here, gliding past tables, trailed by two quiet assistants and a maitre d', who bowed more than he spoke. As he approached table 7, the staff silently adjusted. Elena, the waitress assigned to the table, quickly stepped forward. Her hair was neatly tied back, her uniform crisp, her apron spotless. Just 22, Elena had only worked here for 3 weeks. Before that, she'd juggled shifts at diners and coffee shops, but she'd never faced anything like this. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. Vincent Langford didn't tolerate mistakes. He didn't tolerate lateness. And he definitely didn't tolerate mediocrity. But Elena needed this job. Not for status, not for a career in hospitality, she needed it to survive. Her mother was recovering from major surgery, and Elena was the sole caretaker, working 2 jobs, studying at night, holding on to a dream of becoming a lawyer someday. She stepped forward with the wine list, her voice steady but soft. "Good evening, Mr. Langford. May I offer you a selection of our reserve wines?" Vincent barely looked at her. He waved a hand. "Just bring me the 97 Margot." "Yes, sir," she replied and turned to retrieve the bottle. As she walked to the cellar station, she ignored the nervous glances of the other waiters. She knew they were watching, hoping she wouldn't mess up. But Elena was meticulous. She moved with focus, selecting the exact vintage, carefully checking the temperature, cradling the bottle like it was made of spun sugar. When she returned, Vincent was scrolling through his phone, lips pursed. She opened the bottle, poured a tasting into the glass with practiced precision. He took a sip, gave a slight nod. "Acceptable," he muttered. That was the highest compliment he'd given all year. Dinner service began. Appetizers were served. Conversation among his guests was muted and careful. No one joked too loudly, no one dared interrupt him. Elena remained invisible, the way good servers are trained to be, present but never intrusive. The main course order came in. Vincent requested the chef's signature Wagyu filet, medium rare. Elena repeated the order back clearly. She double-checked it before handing it to the kitchen. She checked again once the plate was being prepped. Everything had to be perfect. 20 minutes later, she approached his table with the main course. She placed the plate gently before him, explaining the dish with warmth but brevity. Vincent stared at the steak for a long second. He picked up his knife, sliced into it, observed the pinkness. Then his eyes narrowed. "What is this?" he said flatly. It's the Wagyu filet, sir," Elena answered, her voice calm. "Does this look medium rare to you?" he snapped, his voice rising. Elena blinked. The steak, to her trained eye, was a perfect medium rare. Slightly warm red center, seared edges. But Vincent didn't care. He had already decided. "You call this service?" he barked. The entire table fell quiet. Even his assistant paused mid-chew. "This is why people like you don't get far. You can't even follow basic instructions." Elena opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came. The words stung. Not because of their volume, He wasn't yelling at full force, but because of their intent. They were sharp, designed to cut. They weren't about the steak. They were about her. Her background. Her uniform. Her position. All around them, the restaurant fell into a hush. Diners stopped their forks midair. A woman across the room tilted her head slightly, watching. One man lowered his wine glass slowly. Even the pianist, sensing the tension, let the final note of his song linger in the air without starting another. Elena felt her chest tighten, not from fear but from pressure. Heat crawled up her neck. The humiliation wasn't private, it was public. But she had grown up learning how to stay composed. She had taken care of her sick mother through surgeries, fought off eviction notices, studied law books at midnight with aching eyes. She didn't fight for pride. She fought for survival. Vincent leaned forward, clearly expecting an apology, maybe even tears. That's how it usually went. He'd done this before. Broken people with a few words. Taught lessons. Maintained control. But Elena didn't break. She took a breath and met his eyes, not with fire, but with clarity. She was not trembling. She was not apologizing. Not yet. And that was when something started to shift in the room, subtle but real. Like the moment before a thunderclap, when everything feels still intense. Vincent, somehow sensing it, sat back and waited. But Elena said nothing. She didn't speak right away. She held the silence in the same way she held the wine bottle earlier, with care, with intention. Vincent scoffed. Speechless. Figures. Still, she didn't react. Then finally, with a calmness that felt almost surreal in the moment, Elena opened her mouth to respond, not with an explanation, not with a defense. But with something else entirely. She had no idea that the sentence forming in her mind was about to change everything. But she said it anyway. The silence that followed Vincent's biting insult stretched across the elegant restaurant like a slow-moving storm. Dishes stopped clattering, conversations froze mid-sentence, and the piano behind the velvet curtains came to an abrupt halt as if even the musician had sensed something sacred or dangerous had just begun. The stillness wasn't planned or coordinated. It was instinctive, a collective, breath-held moment in which a room full of wealthy patrons and sharply dressed servers waited to see what the young waitress would do next. Elena stood completely still, her tray balanced with one hand, the steak in question resting untouched on the pristine white plate. Her spine was straight, but not stiff. Her breathing, though measured, was audible enough for the nearest diners to hear. Yet her face held something unusual, a quiet strength, the kind of composure one gains not from formal training but from surviving battles no one else saw. She had been humiliated before. This wasn't her first time being spoken down to, belittled, or used as a scapegoat by someone who thought money granted them power over others. But this moment felt different. This moment demanded more than professionalism. It demanded something human. Vincent Langford, now, leaning back in his velvet-lined chair, sipped his wine with a smug look. He believed he'd won. He believed he'd crushed yet another disposable service worker beneath the weight of his voice, as if his words were hammers and her dignity merely glass. But Elena, still standing in front of him, didn't shrink. She gently lowered the tray onto the side table next to her. Her hands, though lightly trembling, remained precise in their movements. She didn't glance toward the kitchen, didn't call for a manager, and didn't reach for a notepad to jot down a replacement. Instead, she turned her full attention toward the man before her, not his money, not his reputation, but him as a human being. And then she spoke. "I'd rather be serving with dignity," she said slowly, her voice quiet but firm, "than living with your kind of emptiness." There was no anger in her tone. No shout, no retaliation. Just a line spoken as if she were pointing out the weather outside, honest, simple, clear. For a second, no one moved. Even Vincent seemed unsure of what he had just heard. His eyebrows twitched, and his lips opened slightly, but no sound came out. A sharp exhale came from a man at a nearby table. A fork clinked against a plate 2 tables over. A woman across the aisle leaned back, her eyes wide with disbelief. The energy in the room had shifted entirely, away from the tyrannical billionaire and toward the young woman who had just done what few dared to do. Vincent's assistant blinked rapidly, clearly not accustomed to seeing his boss silenced. One of the other guests at Vincent's table, a venture capitalist by trade, known more for his backhanded compliments than actual talent, adjusted his tie uncomfortably, avoiding Vincent's eye. Elena didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't follow the moment with more commentary. Her single sentence was enough. And then, quietly, from a corner booth near the back of the restaurant, came the first slow clap. It was a woman in a dark blue dress with silver in her hair, her expression unreadable but her eyes focused squarely on Elena. Her hands came together again, then again. And then another patron joined in. Then another. Within seconds, applause swelled through the room, soft at first, like gentle rain, then stronger, until the entire restaurant was engulfed in the sound of approval, awe, and something else, admiration. Vincent sat frozen. His usual weapon, humiliation, had failed him. Worse, it had backfired in front of an audience of his peers, some of whom were now standing, clapping for the young waitress instead of placating his ego. He glanced around, expecting someone, anyone, to come to his defense. But no one did. His power, once absolute in rooms like these, felt diluted now. His voice, once sharp enough to cut careers in half, felt dull and unnecessary. He looked back at Elena, who remained still, not drinking in the praise but quietly weathering it. It wasn't a victory she sought. It was simply the truth. Finally, Vincent stood. His motion was abrupt, like a chess piece knocked over during a losing game. Without a word, he threw his napkin on the table and turned to leave. His two assistants scrambled behind him, their faces red with embarrassment. The maitre d' didn't try to stop him. No one did. The applause slowly faded as the door closed behind the billionaire, the echo of his expensive shoes against the marble floor vanishing into the quiet hum of the night outside. For a brief moment after he left, there was no music, no talking, no movement. Then, slowly, people returned to their meals, their conversations, their realities, but with a lingering sense of having witnessed something rare. Something real. Elena, cheeks now flushed, turned toward the kitchen, unsure whether she should expect to be reprimanded, congratulated, or possibly even fired. She didn't regret what she said, but she knew the hospitality industry could be unforgiving, even when the truth was spoken gently. Before she could take more than a few steps, a woman in a tailored gray blazer approached her from the far corner. "Excuse me," the woman said, extending a hand. Her voice was smooth, confident, but kind. That was one of the most graceful things I've seen in years. Elena gave a polite nod, still unsure of what to say. "My name is Diana Rivers," the woman added. "I own several restaurants, including this one." Elena's eyes widened slightly. She'd heard the name before. Diana Rivers was a legend in the culinary world. A self-made millionaire, she'd started as a dishwasher and built an empire from the ground up. She was the kind of woman other women dreamed of becoming. "I was watching from over there," Diana continued, nodding toward the corner booth. "And I have to say, you handled that better than most CEOs I've interviewed." "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "I was just being honest." "I know. And that honesty," Diana said, her voice full of meaning, "might be exactly what the world needs more of." Elena didn't know how to respond. Compliments from customers were one thing. But this felt different. Diana paused for a moment, then handed Elena a card. "If you're ever looking for something more," she said gently, "call me." With that, she turned and returned to her table. Elena looked down at the card. It was simple, white, with silver lettering. It had Diana's personal number. As she walked back to the kitchen, her fellow staff members made way for her, some nodding respectfully, others offering soft pats on the shoulder. The head chef met her eyes through the kitchen window, smiled, and gave her a small nod of approval, something he rarely did for anyone. The manager approached, looking slightly dazed. Elena, he began, that was. I know, she said, bracing herself. No, I mean, that was remarkable, he finished. You said what everyone else has wanted to say to that man for years. I wasn't trying to make a scene. You didn't, he said. He did. You just reminded him, and all of us, what class really looks like. She felt something shift in her chest. A weight lifting. Not completely, life was still waiting for her outside this building. Bills, her mother's health, long nights of study. But tonight, something small but important had changed. She had faced a giant, not with force, not with revenge, but with integrity. And in doing so, she had been seen. She returned to her station. The next table she approached, an elderly couple, greeted her with a warm smile. You're brave, dear, the woman whispered. Don't ever lose that. Elena smiled. It was the first time all evening that it felt easy. And as the music resumed and the restaurant regained its rhythm, Elena carried on, not as just another waitress, but as a reminder that dignity, once spoken, could silence even the loudest of voices.